Hello everyone and welcome to Sharing Vietnam on Net with VTC10. I'm Bong Nhật. Since entry into the force of the United States-Vietnam bilateral trade agreement on December 10 of 2001, increased trade between the United States and Vietnam combined with the large scale of the United States investment in Vietnam. Up to now, the bilateral trade turnover has increased up to the $20 billion, approximately 1,200%. The United States has become the biggest investor in Vietnam and one of the most important markets for exports from Vietnam. To get to know more about the United States and Vietnam trade cooperation, our guest today, Mrs. Sarah Kemp, Commercial Counselor of the United States Embassy of Vietnam.
Mrs. Sarah Kemp from the United States of America. She's now the Commercial Counselor of the U.S. Embassy in Hanoi, Vietnam. Sarah Kemp joined the U.S. Department of Commerce in 1992. During her tenure in D.C., she helped formulate and draft the first national export strategy and focused on the U.S.-Asian trade promotion policy. Developing the White House Initiative, the U.S.-Asian Alliance for Mutual Growth.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Sarah Kemp, for joining our Sharing Vietnam for today, and it's my pleasure. What are your thinking about Vietnam's and Vietnamese people?
Very open, very friendly, very hardworking, a lot of entrepreneurial spirit. It's a great place for me to be as a commercial officer. The market's growing and dynamic, so it's a fabulous opportunity for me to be here.
Can you share with us an overview about the world-leading economy, United States, and its trade cooperation with the Southeast Asian nations, including Vietnam?
U.S.-ASEAN relations have a very long, positive history going back to the 70s. You know, from Seattle to Miami, American businesses, companies, workers have been benefiting from U.S.-ASEAN trade. I think there's over 200 billion in goods and services between U.S. and ASEAN. That supports nearly 800,000 jobs in America. Likewise, the U.S. is a key market for all the ASEAN nations for their exports. ASEAN is the third largest economy after Japan and China in Asia, and what's really dramatic in my mind is the growth rate. If you look at their increase in GDP, it's been over 170%. I think what makes that relationship work so well is that the interests between the ASEAN countries and the U.S. are aligned. There's a lot of mutual interest. The U.S. has always believed that a strong and prosperous Southeast Asia is good for everyone and is supporting ASEAN's goals of a unified market. So I think there's a lot of areas where the U.S. and ASEAN can work together cooperatively.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Sarah Kemp, for your sharing. And now I think you should take a short break. And everyone, here is a clip about the trade cooperation between the United States and Vietnam.
In the first 10 months of last year, the import and export output between Vietnam and the USA reached nearly $15.3 billion, an increase of 20% over the same period last year. Of the total, Vietnam's export to the USA reached $12.3 billion, up 20.3%. Vietnam is ranked as 26th exporter to the US. Vietnam's import to the US reached $2.97, an increase of 19.2% over the same period of 2009. These include mainly vehicles, woodwork, manufacturing equipment, and cattle food.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Sharing Vietnam on Net with VTC10, and we are talking to Mrs. Sarah Kemp, Commercial Counselor of United States Embassy to Vietnam. Okay, Mrs. Sarah, as the Commercial Counselor of the United States Embassy to Vietnam, can you evaluate the trade turnover between the United States and Vietnam so far?
That's a great question. First of all, last December marked the 10-year anniversary of our trade relations, going back to the signing of the bilateral trade agreement in 2001, which is really the foundation and underpinning of our trade relationship. If you look at how much trade has expanded, in 2001, our trade was 1.5 billion. Last year, it was 19 billion. That's a dramatic increase. The U.S. is Vietnam's top export market. The U.S. absorbs 20% of everything that Vietnam produces ends up in the United States. If you look at the increase in exports, both from the U.S. to Vietnam and from Vietnam to the U.S., and you look at the growth in Vietnam of the gross domestic product, they both are lines that have a trajectory upwards, very positive. GDP, in the same period of time that exports have gone from, or two-way trade has gone from 1.5 billion to almost 19 billion, Vietnam's gross domestic product tripled, went from about 400 to 1,300. So there's a very clear correlation that expanding trade brings benefits to both the governments, but also to the people of both countries.
So which field do you think is the most potential for two sides?
You know, I think there are many, many fields. I think U.S. companies are looking to try to partner with Vietnamese companies in fields of medical, education, infrastructure, energy. But I'm really very excited about some of the new opportunities that might exist. The U.S. and Vietnam, as well as some of the other trading partners, are working on something called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's a new bilateral agreement that will really, I think, revolutionize this area of the world because it creates a common market for 500 million people.
As you know that since the bilateral trade agreement between the United States and the Vietnam were signed, the bilateral trade turnover has increased up to $20 billion, approximately 1,200%. So what do you think that should be done to ensure this growth rate sustainably?
I think U.S. companies look for environments that are consistent, transparent, that are open, and where the regulations are enforced. So to the extent that Vietnam can provide that kind of business environment, I think it'll continue to attract foreign investment. It'll continue to attract U.S. companies. Vietnam, I think, has a very unique opportunity right now and for the next couple of years. U.S. companies are looking to diversify, particularly diversify their supply chain out of China, for example. And Vietnam has some advantages over some of its Southeast Asian neighbors in terms of lower prices, a dynamic young workforce, and a strong entrepreneurial work ethic, which I really think could allow Vietnam to achieve its Vision 2020.
Thank you, Mr. Sarah, for your sharing. And now, everyone, let's take a short break.
Five years since November 2006, Vietnam became the World Trade Organization's 150 member after a 12-year wait. Despite the global economic crisis, Vietnamese macroeconomy was stable with a sustainable growth rate, about 7% per year. Total GDP in 2010 was 3 times bigger than that of 2000. Although there are many challenges and difficulties ahead, Vietnam is trying to follow directions to sustainably develop its economy in the future.
Welcome back to our talk show, and we are talking to Mrs. Sarah Kemp, Commercial Counselor of the United States Embassy to Vietnam. Mrs. Sarah, Vietnam is on its way to celebrate its 5 years of integrating into WTO. Can you evaluate its status now in terms of commercial and trade to the world in 2007?
You know, looking back over the last 10 years from when Vietnam integrated first with the U.S. in terms of the bilateral trade agreement and then also its accession to WTO, it's been steadily increasing in trade, and I think it's gained a lot of benefits from opening up. I mean, in essence, the trade pie has just gotten bigger. You know, U.S. exports to Vietnam have grown from 460 million to 4.6, and we estimate that every billion in exports creates 6,000 jobs. So in the U.S., our relationship with Vietnam sustains 25,000 jobs. That's very meaningful to the U.S. It's very meaningful, especially in a climate of 8.6% unemployment. But likewise, Vietnam has also experienced growth and opening up. And I think looking forward, again, to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, you're going to see even more integration. And with the integration is going to come more opportunities, more jobs for Vietnamese, and a diversity of the industrial base here in Vietnam.
So in your opinion, what is the most challenging difficulty that both sides will confront to ensure this sustainable development?
On the macro level, we know, there are many challenges, inflation, double-digit inflation being one of them. But I really think in the long run, Vietnam will achieve macroeconomic stability and win the confidence of the markets by continuing to focus on market reforms, by improving transparency both on the monetary policy side as well as economic data, and by avoiding administrative measures, price controls, restrictions on imports that damage the country's investment climate. At the end of the day, what we want to do is increase trade on both sides, which is good for the consumer. We want to open it up so that the consumer here has more choices. More competition hopefully is beneficial, I think is beneficial to the consumer. We'd love to be able to have U.S. beef at a fair and reasonable price in Vietnam. So I think there are challenges, but I'm confident that Vietnam will absolutely address them and overcome them.
Will the United States plans to invest more in Vietnam, especially in the new fields?
I think so. I think you'll see a lot of investment. In the newspapers, you already see many articles about different companies that are looking to invest in Vietnam. As I mentioned before, companies are trying to diversify their supply chain out of China. I think there's a very unique opportunity in the next couple of years for Vietnam to be able to gain some of that. So yes, I expect more and more companies to come to Vietnam. Vietnam is part of President Obama's National Export Initiative. It's a priority for the U.S. government to promote Vietnam and to promote two-way trade with Vietnam. I know in my line of work we're seeing more and more government visitors. Both countries, I think, are really diligently working to promote the relationship and to try to develop into a strategic partnership with the relationship, and that's beneficial for all.
Would you like to say anything to the Vietnamese audiences?
I'd like to wish them and their families a prosperous and healthy new year and wish them all the best for the Year of the Dragon.